Hi there, and welcome back to another Mr. Carter Science Special. Today we'll be looking at two things: the minerals that plants need and transpiration, how those minerals and water are transported around the plant. So first thing to look at will be transporting plants, and as always keep your eye out for the syllabus references as we go through so that you can follow along your course. So what minerals are needed by a plant? Well, there's three major minerals that all plants need. Of course there are a lot more. So plants need magnesium, nitrates and phosphorus. Now magnesium is needed by plants to make the chlorophyll molecule. In fact, a bit like iron in hemoglobin, there is one atom of magnesium at the center of every chlorophyll molecule. Nitrates are needed by plants to make amino acids and therefore proteins, and phosphorus is needed by plants to grow very healthy roots. So what does that look like if we have some plants where we have a mineral deficiency? Well, here we've got two leaves. One of them is deficient in magnesium, the other one has been grown in adequate magnesium. And what's the difference? Well, if we don't have enough magnesium, we get yellow leaves and very little chlorophyll. If we've got plenty of magnesium, we get very green leaves with lots of chlorophyll. Plants grown without nitrates, they don't develop very healthy leaves. Again, we can see the normal plants here where we've got nitrates present and the mineral deficient plants with nitrates absent. So in the mineral deficient plants we get very small stunted leaves with a very small surface area for capturing sunlight, so less photosynthesis, less glucose and less growth. If we've got plenty of nitrates, then we get large healthy leaves with a large surface area for capturing sunlight, so more photosynthesis, more glucose produced and more growth. And the reason for this is to do with the number of proteins that the plants can make. Without nitrates you can't make amino acids, so you can't make proteins. Here we have plants grown without phosphorus and plants grown with phosphorus. When we have the mineral deficient plant without the phosphorus, then we get unhealthy roots with a small surface area for absorbing water. So this plant can't absorb very much water. On the other hand, if we have phosphorus present, we get healthy roots with a very large surface area, so we can absorb a large amount of water and the plant will be healthy. So what cells do plants have to help them absorb minerals and therefore water and to transport the minerals throughout the plants? Well, the first major set of cells are root hair cells, which are found in the root. And root hair cells have a very large surface area to absorb water and minerals from the soil. The minerals are actively transported into the root hair cells, and this creates a high concentration, so water will follow by osmosis. The water can then move through the root from cell to cell to cell by osmosis, or the water can actually move from cell wall to cell wall to cell wall, so it doesn't have to enter the cell, and the water will move through cell walls by diffusion. So the water can move by osmosis or diffusion through the root hair cells here and into this structure here, which is known as the xylem. And the xylem is a long tube that carries water and minerals from the roots up to the leaves, where they can be used in a variety of different processes. So here we can see those two diagrams more clearly. The water entering by osmosis because of the active transport, whereby all the minerals have been actively moved into the root hair cell to create the correct concentration gradient for water to follow by osmosis. And that water can then move by osmosis from cell to cell to cell all the way to the xylem. And of course the minerals also move by active transport from cell to cell to cell to the xylem. And here is the second pathway where the water is moving through the cell wall by diffusion. One thing to notice is that these root hair cells and root cells have a large amount of mitochondria to produce, to carry out respiration and produce ATP, which is the energy source to allow active transport to happen. So pause the video now and try this 6-mark exam question. Explain how plant roots absorb minerals and water. If you're just having a bit of a problem with it, that's fine. I'll show you a gap fill answer next, and then I'll go through the answer with you in a moment or two. But pause the video first and give this a try. So here's the answers. Minerals like nitrates and magnesium are in a very low concentration in the soil. We could put that in here. Low concentration of minerals. Minerals move from a low to a high concentration by active transport and they enter the cells. So we end up with a high concentration of minerals in the cells. So the concentration in the root hair cells increases. There is now a low concentration outside the cell and a high concentration inside the cell, and therefore water will flow into the root hair cells and flow through the root cells towards the xylem. Plants actually have two sets of tubes called the xylem and the phloem. We'll focus on the xylem first. In order to see a xylem, you need to be able to see the water that flows through a xylem. And xylems transport water from the roots to the leaves. So one way that you can do this is to take a beaker with some coloured water in, perhaps coloured with ink or food colouring, and place a piece of celery into that beaker and leave it for a few hours. As transpiration happens and the water is drawn up, so is the ink. If you then take that celery and cut it in half, you'll see here, for example, or here, you'll see that the xylem cells with the water inside that's coloured are clearly visible. And if you looked under a microscope, you would see this general structure with the xylem cells on the inside of the stem and the other cells that we haven't yet talked about, the phloem cells, on the outside of the stem. So xylem cells are dead. The top and the bottom of the cells have disappeared, so water will form a continuous tube. This is helped by hydrogen bonding between water molecules. The xylem cells themselves have thick cell walls and rings of very hard lignin to withstand the water pressure, the negative pressure as water moves up, so that the cells don't collapse in on themselves. Phloem cells, on the other hand, phloem is actually a tissue that's made up of two types of cells. We have sieve cells here, and then next to those sieve cells here we have companion cells. And the function of the phloem is to transport sugars, mainly sucrose, both up and down the plant. So sucrose is used to make nectar and proteins, and sucrose is also used in respiration by mitochondria. So any cells that have needs for sucrose, be it root hair cells, for example, that need to carry out a large amount of respiration, so they have ATP for active transport, they need the phloem to transport the sucrose down to them. In flowers, where they might need to produce nectar to attract insects, again they will need a phloem to transport sucrose up to them. So next to the sieve cells we have companion cells, and it's these companion cells that actively transport the sucrose in and out of the phloem. If you look carefully at the sieve cells here, sieve cells have a couple of interesting adaptations. Firstly, they have holes in the ends of the cells to allow the liquids to flow from one sieve cell to the next, and they only have a very small amount of cytoplasm and no nucleus. This means that there's more room for the central channel, but it does mean there's less organelles, so they won't be able to have mitochondria, for example. They won't be carrying out respiration. So all the functions of active transport, of respiration, are carried out by the companion cell, which will then be utilised to regulate the concentrations of sucrose that are in the phloem. So the next section that we need to consider then is transpiration. And transpiration is the rate of water loss by evaporation through the stomata from the leaves of a plant. So if we have a quick look here, we can see the xylem vessels here transporting water up through the stems of a plant and into the leaves itself. And that water will flow from cell to cell through the palisade cells, through the spongy mesophyll cells, and eventually it will evaporate into the air spaces here and here and here and here, and then out through the stomata. Now, why does this happen? Well, this happens because outside the leaves there is a very low concentration of water vapour. So the water will diffuse out of the leaves through the stomata, because diffusion is the movement of a substance from high concentrations inside the leaf to low concentrations outside the leaf. So this will lower the concentration in the air spaces in the leaf, so water evaporates from the mesophils into these air spaces, and this in turn will pull water from the xylem tissue and eventually from the roots. So this allows water to move through the entire plant. As the water evaporates from the stomata, it creates a pull force, and because each water molecule is attached to the next water molecule due to hydrogen bonds, and that means that each water molecule will gradually move up when one is lost through the stomata. So the transpiration is the rate of water loss by evaporation through the stomata from the leaves of a plant, and this transpiration can be affected. The rate of transpiration can be affected by a number of different factors, including wind speed, temperature, humidity, and light intensity. So how exactly do we measure the rate of transpiration? Well, the first thing we need to do is use a pedometer. And this is the pedometer here, this piece of apparatus. And what we have to do is, underwater, we fill the apparatus with water and we add in a cut plant stem into a sealed pedometer using the rubber bung here. And we're trying to make certain that there are no air bubbles at all in the system, apart from the one that we will purposefully introduce into the capillary tube here. And it's the distance that this bubble travels that shows us how much water the stem has taken up. As water is lost by transpiration through the leaves, this pulls water up into the xylem, and that pulls water along the capillary tube, and therefore the little air bubble will move. So this gives an indirect measurement of transpiration, and often you will measure the rate of transpiration in millimeters per minute. How far has that bubble moved in millimeters per minute? So these different factors that will affect this rate of transpiration, we're going to go through each one now, and we're going to have a little think about how we can write a good exam answer to fully explain how they will affect this rate of transpiration. Will we increase the rate? Will we decrease the rate? For example, the first, humidity. So just pause the video for a moment and see whether you can fill in this paragraph to explain how humidity affects the rate of transpiration. Okay, so let's see the answers then. As humidity increases, the rate of transpiration will actually decrease. And this is because there will be more water particles in the air outside the leaf stomata. And this decreases the concentration gradient, so water vapour diffuses out of the leaf at a slower rate, and therefore the rate of transpiration will decrease. If less water is leaving the stomata because there's less diffusion happening, then that means there's less pulling on the next water particles, so the water flows more slowly through the xylem and we have less transpiration. What about wind speed? So pause the video now and see whether you can write without any help an explanation for how wind speed would affect the rate of transpiration. And remember, what we're trying to do is explain. So we're not just describing how, we're trying to say why. Why does wind speed have that effect? Need some help, here is a gap fill. Again, pause the video, write this down, see if you can fully explain how wind speed affects the rate of transpiration. And here is the answer. As wind speed increases, the rate of transpiration increases, and this is because the wind blows away the particles of water vapor close to the leaf, so there are fewer water particles in the air outside the leaf stomata, and this increases the concentration gradient, so water vapor diffuses out of the leaf at a faster rate, and therefore the rates of transpiration will increase. We'll do the same thing now to try and explain how temperature affects the rate of transpiration. Again, pause the video, see if you can write down a full explanation, and then we'll check it and you can compare to the standard answer. If you need help, here is a gap fill. So here's the answer. As temperature increases, the rate of transpiration increases, and this is because the particles of water vapor gain kinetic energy and they move more. So the water particles outside the leaf move away from the leaf. So there are fewer water particles in the air outside the leaf stomata, and this increases the concentration gradient, so water vapor diffuses out of the leaf at a faster rate, and therefore the rate of transpiration will increase. The next one is light intensity. Explain how the increase in light intensity will affect the rate of transpiration. So as light intensity increases, the rate of transpiration increases, and this is because there's more light energy, so there's more photosynthesis, so more stomata open to allow in more carbon dioxide, and this increases the surface area that water can diffuse through. So water vapor diffuses out of the leaf at a faster rate, and therefore the rate of transpiration increases. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so that as we release more Mr. Carter Science special videos, you'll be the first to know about them. Thank you very much. Goodbye.